Hi, this is Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit, the podcast where I interview single Christians about their lives and faith. Welcome to episode 4. This is the final interview of the self-awareness and growth themed episodes, and I can't think of a better person to round things out for us. Katie Hodge is a graphic designer at the Public Theater. She is a fellow North Carolina native and a graduate of Appalachian State University. She loves hiking, art, and cheez-its. On this episode, Katie and I talk North Carolina. She shares a story of feeling unsuitable as a Christian woman, and we talk about accepting and growing into who we were created to be. I always love talking to Katie because she's very intuitive and an incredibly deep thinker. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from her too. So, here we go. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Mary B.
Welcome to the Unsuitable podcast, or I should say Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit is the official name, because there's another Unsuitable podcast, which is about finance.
Oh.
Fun fact for all of the listeners. So it's real different from this.
Yeah, balancing your checkbook.
They're doing like a pun thing with the word suit, right? Unsuitable.
Oh, like
Clark
suit.
Kent. I don't know why I was like, nobody can see, but I was like motioning like a ripping off of a suit. Sure.
And I think I was motioning like putting on a blazer. So I think we were doing the same thing in reverse.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of professional things, I'm a wee bit jealous of your job. Well, not your job specifically, because I can't do what you do, but of the fact that you get to work in the theater industry, because I'm a huge theater nerd. You work at the Public Theater, which is so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, pros and cons, whatever. Is that what brought you to the city?
Well, actually, no. I grew up not really immersed in theater that much. I went to the school productions, and my brother was some very small parts and some random things. And so I would go growing up, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I wasn't someone who like listened to all of the cast recordings all the time and was really like, I love theater. But when I was kind of getting done at school, I was a graphic design major, and I was really thinking towards what was next. And we had gone on a lot of school trips to New York, and we went and we interviewed with a lot of firms and studios and telling us really what graphic design was like in New York City. And from there, that's really when I kind of started to think like, oh, I think I would want to pursue graphic design in New York. And so that's where that passion really kind of was embedded of like, oh, I think I want to go to New York when I'm done. So I graduated college, and I lived at home, saved up money, worked, and then it actually kind of worked out, and I was able to move here in the fall. And when I got here, I didn't have a job, and I was like, I just want to do graphic design, and it's easier to get a job when you're here.
Yes.
So proximity is everything. And so I moved here, and I worked retail, and I was just applying to a lot of jobs. And actually, an old classmate contacted me about an assistant position, a graphics assistant position being open at the Public Theater. And he kind of told me, he was like, hey, we're going to have our graphics assistant position open up. You should interview for it. So I actually knew one other person who was a graphic designer there who had also gone to the same college. And so we got coffee, and we talked about what the position looked like and what that would mean. In-house design wasn't really my first choice. But for some reason, I was just like, you know what? This is a job, and I really am curious about this. I wasn't really familiar with the Public Theater. And I met and got coffee with him, and that's when I started to kind of really get the understanding of the legacy of the Public Theater and what that means. And that's when I got really overwhelmed in a way where I was like, oh, this is like
a big deal.
This is like a thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, what is this?
For just to give people who are listening a little context who maybe don't understand why the Public Theater is like a kind of a big deal. It's like had so many like huge shows start off there and even just like come through there. Hamilton, like when it was doing its off-Broadway run, was at the Public
Yeah. Yeah. So the Public Theater is an off-Broadway theater, and Hamilton started there before it went on to be on Broadway. A chorus line started there.
Right.
Hair started there.
Right.
So there's just like all of these.
So, and they're all about like these pretty innovative, cutting edge kind of ideas and performances.
Yeah. It's like theater that matters. Like, not that other theater doesn't matter, but like that's definitely something that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Of like just like theater where it's like, what is this doing and what is this pushing?
What
that
is the
definitely
point
is like
of that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a huge question that we go through. And another draw to that in terms of just like purely graphic design related careers is that there's a designer, Paula Scher, and she is the creative director of the Public Theater. She doesn't work there. She works, she's a partner at a design firm, and it's called Pentagram. And she is someone that like I learned about in school, and she's in a lot of like reference books that we know. She's like, as far as graphic design fame goes, she is in that conversation. And so when I had that coffee with my friend Cameron, that was when I was like, oh, you like work with Paula Scher. I was like, not only am I learning that Hamilton is like was born here,
Right.
but then I'm learning that Paula Scher is involved, and I was like, what's happening?
What is this place?
Yeah, I was like, what is this place, and why was I not familiar with it?
Yeah.
And so then I was really nervous, but then I got the assistant job, and I worked there part time, and then I started to work there full time, and now here we are. It's crazy to think about working much anywhere else. It's wild.
It's been a couple of years, yeah?
Yeah.
Because you and I have been here almost exactly the same amount of time. Like within a couple of months
which is
of
wild.
each other moved here. And I mean, we didn't meet until a few months ago.
I know.
Or
which
something.
is just wild. Yeah.
We have discussed this before, that time is a construct.
Time is a construct.
We met a certain amount of time ago, anywhere from yesterday to 6 months ago.
Exactly.
Somewhere in that window.
Somewhere in this window, Mary B and I crossed paths, which is wild also considering that we're from the same place.
We are from the same place. I have had like several fellow Southerners on this podcast, and I love it. I love asking like what people miss about living in the South, because I like definitely miss certain things.
Oh yeah.
But I think you're my first born and bred North Carolinian.
What?
I interviewed someone for this season who lived in North Carolina for an extended period of time, but like from North Carolina, which is funny because you grew up in Charlotte, which is 6 hours from where I grew up,
Which is just
and
bonkers.
still in the same state.
Like such
Bananas.
a wide state.
Such a wide,
a wide array.
Yes.
We have a wide array of people and land.
And land, right? You got the
Mountains to
ocean, you got the mountains, you got it all.
why it's
You
the
got
best.
the in between that's like clay and weird.
The Piedmont.
The Piedmont, as
they
it
call
were. The
Piedmont.
foothills.
The foothills, the Piedmont, and the ocean.
Yep. That's it. That's North Carolina.
That's us.
So I know there are pros and cons of living everywhere. And definitely things to love about North Carolina and things that were not awesome about it. So can you just give a sense of what your experience was like living there?
My experience growing up in North Carolina, it was pretty positive all across the board. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it was really positive because I live in a lot of privilege in that sense of like,
Right.
I grew up in the Bible Belt. I heavily identified as a Christian growing up my whole life. I'm straight, I'm white, I am all of these things where living in this kind of world was really easy.
Yeah. Right.
Then again, growing up in the Bible Belt really just gives a lot of questions to a lot of things in terms of like Christianity kind of being a given for your social circles rather than
A choice.
Rather than a choice and rather than a real, not that it's not real, I hesitate to say that, but rather than a very serious commitment as opposed to a cultural norm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I definitely think that my time in college, I really started to feel very just very, not suffocated. I think that's a little too strong of a term, but I think that I really felt like life in North Carolina for me was very small. And I look back on that and I think that's a really, it was an unbalanced way to think of that. And so that's really how I got to feel with North Carolina to a certain point. And, now that I've been living so far, not so far from it, but I've been living really far from it for 3 years, it's really given me a whole new appreciation for it.
Yeah.
In a way that I really appreciate and value.
Right.
In a sense where when I left, I was like, oh, it's just North Carolina. Like, whatever. Maybe I'll come back. Maybe not. It's like, it's so small. And now I'm in this place where I'm just like, it's a great place to live. And there are problems.
Right.
Like I said, and a huge hang up I have is like the disparity of privilege. But
yeah, right. Of course.
But it really was an incredible place to grow up.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky.
Yeah.
In a lot of the ways that I went through my life there.
Yeah.
So I have very positive associations with North Carolina.
I do too, largely. Yeah. Like, definitely a lot to reckon with, again, from a privilege standpoint.
Yeah.
Which was not even something I fully understood, like, beyond a conceptual level until I moved away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, like, I was like, oh, wait, like, that's, like, my experience growing up in North Carolina, but like the South in general. And it's not just the South, like the Midwest, everywhere is kind of touched by this issue. But to kind of realize that my experience is not what the majority of the world experiences. And that, like, just because it's a problem or a need or an issue that I don't feel doesn't mean that it's not there.
Absolutely.
So, like, yeah, like a lot to appreciate, but also a lot to reckon with.
Yeah. And it's definitely something I think about in terms of if I'm no longer going to live in New York at any point in the future,
right?
It's something that I've thought about, of like, I really don't want to just mindlessly go back to a place where I don't have to think about these things in the same way, because I'm for all intents and purposes in a monolith of people, because it is something that if you're not around it,
right,
you have the tendency to just kind of let a fog rest over your eyes of like, oh, it's this easy for everybody.
Right. Right. And I feel like too, there's also a lot to be said for, I have a lot of friends who have stayed, but who are like actively working in their own ways to change things. I think there's a lot to be said for that as well.
Absolutely.
And in many ways, it's like a more challenging road.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's also really important for me to mention too, is that it's like, this was something that I needed to learn in this way, and I reckoned with and am reckoning with in this way. And I have friends who have stayed in North Carolina and have stayed in these bubbles, and they've been asking the same questions, and they've been bringing the same level of thoughtfulness that
absolutely
I admire so deeply. Because that feels harder, and it's also something that to change your mindset in your same circumstances is a whole new level, rather than just throwing yourself into hot water. Like what I did when I moved to New York. It was like, oh, everything is different.
Right.
And I'm learning a lot, and that's really, really good. Instead of saying like, oh, this is the same, but I need to educate myself.
Yeah. So speaking of relationships, can you tell me about a significant relationship from your life? I know that's super broad. You can focus in on your time in North Carolina and being a person in the South.
Yeah. I mean,
not to lead the witness, as they say.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, you and I have talked a little bit before just about what it's like, and not meaning to name drop in this podcast, but feeling unsuitable as
branding. Love
branding. Excuse me. Feeling unsuitable, a podcast by Mary B. That's how I'm feeling. No, I just feeling ill-equipped to be the right kind of Christian woman for Christian men in some cases, in the way that I've been taught. And, you know, I haven't dated that much in the grand scheme of things. I haven't dated much at all. But I would say that through a lot of experiences of behavior towards me and be in situations that I have been in, it's really been something where my insecurity about it has felt like it's been proven by situations. And so I think one that really comes to my mind in this sense is my like first college crush. He was this like gorgeous, tall Christian guy who was in a campus ministry that I started going to.
Yeah,
And
like all of the boxes that you want to be checked were checked.
Yes. Like I saw him at the campus ministry and I was like, him. Like, whoa, who is this dude? Like, and you know, when you go to college, they say like 50% of people end up meeting their husbands. And so when you're a naive little freshman like me and you see them and you're like,
I feel like in the South, then that number has to be like higher.
yes. Oh, absolutely.
Has to be.
It
has to be like 80%. Right.
Right. And so it's this thing where
somebody fact check that. I don't have a fact checker and I'm not going to do it, but somebody listening, don't quote me on that.
But look into it.
But it's got to be it's got to be high
because it's staggering to be around.
Yeah.
But I saw him and I was just like, man, like what if he's my husband? You know, he could be. Half of all people
you never
meet
know.
their husbands in college. And it just kind of started this snowball where like crushes can go from really fun things that are just like really nice to have into being like really unhealthy mechanisms
like very,
for just like
very all-consuming.
Yes, like very feedback loop.
Yes.
Like versions of like, oh my gosh, do they like me? What's going on? And he's definitely someone where I identify so much with this because he was that like first college crush. And he was just really sweet. And we were in all of these like group settings together and all of these kinds of things. And he was really nice and we were getting to be friends. And one thing to know about Appalachian State University is that it has, being in the Bible Belt and being in the mountains, I don't know what it is, something in the water, but there are very robust campus ministries and there are many of them. So there was like InterVarsity, there was Crew, there was RUF, there was all of this stuff. And a lot of people went to all of them and they all hung out with each other. And so it was this like huge cohort, which is great, but also can be problematic.
Yeah.
And so being a freshman and being in that first semester of college, there was a lot of intermingling and a lot of meeting people who were both my age and older and having all these friends that, you know, I kind of started to make in different campus ministries and outside of that and all that kind of stuff. And got to be really good friends with someone who is a year older than me, but she was really, really close. She was a huge kindred spirit. It was one of these people where I was like, man, we are so alike. And I just thought that so much. And it turned out that she was like became friends with my crush. And so it turned out that like her and I started hanging out a lot, and I knew that like he was hanging around, and I think I started hanging out with her maybe because he was like there and around, but then I was like, oh, I genuinely like spending time with you and we're so alike. And I just remember I kind of started like this whole thing lasted over the course of a semester, I would say. And it was just so funny because I started to just kind of get hyper aware of like, does he like me? Does he like her?
Right.
Like, what is this looking like?
Like overanalyzing every tiny thing that he says and does. And
and just way overthinking it, which like hello, I'm Katie. That's me. Like, here I am.
Here we are.
Here we are. And I just thought so much about it. And I also really started to think like, oh, well, what if he likes her? We're like the same person. How can he like her if and like not like me? And that was I got so comparative, and I really started to just like say like, okay, well, if she's acting this way in this kind of a sense, like why can't I act that way in this way? And so I really started to, I think consciously and unconsciously, just kind of trying to emulate that and trying to really just put on the attributes of someone who felt more aligned with the kind of person that I thought I wanted with that. But it was a huge thing.
Do you have, sorry.
No, yeah.
Do you have a specific example of something?
It was this quality that she had of, I am a Christian and I don't really ever doubt that. And I don't really wrestle with things that are too hard. I just know that this is correct and I'm walking through this life and I'm really happy. And even if I'm having a hard day, like you're not really going to notice that.
You're still smiling and really,
You're still smiling. You're still this like really cheery person who
bubbly.
Bubbly. Very bubbly, very like I'm an English major. I want to be an elementary school teacher. Like, not that there's a problem with that. But it was this moment of like, I want to be a graphic designer and I'm in the art school and I'm like in drawing classes right now, which is it's like a whole other emotional space.
Yeah.
That is very intense and
it's more brooding.
Yes.
Than bubbly, as we said. Not to use the same word again.
No, but I think that's a really
more brooding than
and more brooding and more just very intense. And I think there can be, as so many people say, I think that there can be a glorification of sadness and messiness in artistic fields of so many kinds. And that's something that I have kind of always struggled with. I'm an emotional person. And so it's like, oh my gosh, this is the call of an artist. And then it's kind of like, no, it's not. I'm also, I have a happy disposition most of the time. It is my natural disposition, but it just didn't manifest this way into being bubbly and like effervescent.
I feel like there's not to put words in your mouth.
Please do.
But it's like a lightness versus like an emotional heaviness.
Absolutely.
I would qualify myself as a pretty emotionally intense person as well, or just an intense person, period. Like if you've listened to like 3 episodes of this, you're like, oh, are you okay? But so there is that sense of like gravity to it versus like a very light, ethereal kind of dainty is maybe too pejorative of an association in this context, but like just like a very effortlessness. Maybe.
I think we could call it that. It's something that appears to you as effortless.
Yes.
And it was something that it was just like, it must be so, the thought that went through my head so often was like, it must be so simple for her to be who she is. Like this bubbly, effervescent, light Christian woman who just wants to talk about all of these fun things all of the time and just is what Christian men want and like and have always wanted and will always want. And
that's the association you were making.
Yes. I'm absolutely all from my perspective, not fact.
To put words in Christian men's mouth. But like as somebody who has felt similarly, because you're comparing your, I don't know who said this initially, but you're comparing your insides to somebody else's outsides.
Absolutely.
Right? And so you have this sense of who they are and that, there's nothing wrong with their life and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's what people like, like these guys don't want somebody who has like emotional baggage, blah blah blah. Right? You like
well,
come
like,
up.
These
come
guys
up with
don't
these
want
things.
someone who like just brings the party down if they're not feeling great. Yeah, like
Yeah, exactly.
or someone who feels too deeply. Like
right. You make these associations to try to explain what is happening.
Absolutely.
Not saying that this is how Christian men are
fully
necessarily.
Thank you so much for this clarification.
Maybe many are. Maybe.
Right.
But
right.
They're also all human beings who have their own range and depth of experience and emotion.
I'm silently clapping because yes, that's so true. And it's something that's so good for me to remember because so many of my friends who are men and are Christians are not this way at all.
Right.
And it's definitely this cloud of insecurity that comes over my eyes. It just kind of throws away a lot of reason.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh, well, this must be what people want. And it's like, that's not true.
Yeah.
Like people are not just one thing.
Right.
And my insecurity was, in this scenario, my insecurity was just screaming at me. Like, you are not fit for this and you could make yourself right for this, but you're just not doing the right things.
Right. Or you're not trying hard enough. Or there's something like you're not loving Jesus in the right way.
Right. It's like your brand and cocktail of Christianity are just like not sufficient enough.
Yeah.
For you and for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically the way that this experience concluded in and of itself is that they started dating. And I was like, at first it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is disappointing, which is so interesting because they are a really great couple and they are now married and it's so tender. And I just learned a lot about how to accept what that is and just the fact that it really wasn't about being a certain kind of person.
Right.
But I will say that moment is definitely an insecurity that I feel often as someone who is a Christian. But the way that it looks definitely doesn't look like how I was taught it was supposed to look as a woman in the church.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to think about. I mean, I think of myself as a relatively authentic person, but there are like times when I wonder, because I'm such like a performance-driven person, I wonder if the extent of what I'm feeling and experiencing translates in how I behave around other people. Like, are there people who look at me and my life and the way that I behave and think all of these things that are just not accurate, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like I'm a writer and a podcaster in New York. That comes with like so many kind of like glamorous, sexy kind of ideas of what my life is like.
Yeah.
And it's like not. Right. It's like there's so many things in my day-to-day that are just so unglamorous and so hard.
Yeah.
Like there are days, I mean, as an introvert, I don't really mind this, but there are days, like will sometimes be multiple days in a row where I don't talk to another person because I work by myself. I write, I'm like doing all of this stuff, you know, and there's like just all of the baggage of being a person.
Yeah.
Right. Where I wonder sometimes if this is how, like, this is an experience that I've had where I'm comparing my insides to somebody else's outsides or like putting all sorts of assumptions onto another person because of how I perceive they're living their life. You know, it makes me wonder, are people doing that with me? And am I communicating the extent? Am I transparent in my wrestling, in my doubt, in my when I'm having a bad day? Like, am I doing that? Or am I just perpetuating some sort of really unhelpful facade?
Right. Exactly.
Which I don't really know. I think that I'm pretty transparently socially awkward and like just all sorts of stuff. Like but I think that I am far more transparent than I think that I am.
Yes. And I think I can be that way too, but I do sometimes. I just kind of forget that I am such an emotional person because instead of really conveying it, I usually am just like, oh, well, that's what that is. And we're just going to put it right over here. And then I'm going to move over to something else.
Yep. And we're just going to move along with our lives.
Right. I'm just going to move along. And that's
fine.
not going to store away somehow and just really embed itself.
It's going to take care of itself.
Yeah, it's just going to go.
FYI, that's we're being sarcastic. That is not what happens.
I run away from my emotions.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's not great. But yeah, it was this moment where my perception of this was, here is someone who was so much like me in so many aspects that are, we are such kindred spirits. We are so alike. We've talked about it so much. And the only difference between us is this. The only difference that I could surmise at that point was this difference in this disposition and in this lightness and in this natural alignment with
a stereotype.
Yeah, this alignment with a stereotype and with what I had grown up understanding was an aspiration as a Christian woman.
Yeah, or an ideal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it was something where I was like, oh, well, I saw the start of them dating not as something that's joyous, which it is, and I saw it as something where it was like, oh, I have failed.
It's some sort of confirmation of you being the wrong sort of woman for a good Christian man.
Exactly. Yeah. This like fake good Christian man.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This amalgam of what you think a Christian man is. Right.
Exactly. And so it was like, oh, I'm not that right now, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna be that.
Yeah.
But there, like after that, there were a lot of other scenarios in which I had very similar understandings that can really be surmised, where it was something where I started to like someone and I just realized like, oh, if I can be more towards that, then maybe he will like me. And it involves so much striving that I just understood as part of the process.
Right.
And it's just not true.
Right.
But it's something that can be so hard for me to unravel.
It's a very achievement-based approach to relationships, which is like LOL. That could be the subtitle of my memoir.
Right. Same. And it's this funny thing where I've realized this a lot this year in particular, of just how much I'm trying to control all this process when inherently anything that involves another person is out of our control,
right?
In some way, shape, or form.
That's been the frustrating lesson of the past few years for me.
Yeah.
Is like realizing
me too
how control oriented I am, and how like, I don't know, I'm also very strategic. I don't know if that describes you as well, but for me it's like I want to like come up with the perfect solution or the perfect formula or the perfect like most efficient way to do literally anything, and like just then I'm done. Then I'm not going to have to like struggle with it anymore.
Right.
And when
I've solved it.
I have solved it. It is done. I have it down. I know how to be to guarantee that I'm going to get what I want.
Yep.
But with humans, you can't do that. And it's very frustrating, right? Yeah. It's all out the window because like the whole point of it is, well, not the whole point, but like, you know, the whole process is that you're not winning anything.
Right.
Right? You're not like
to acquire love just feels like it's not greediest way to approach something that's really beautiful.
Because it's really just like, it's a very frustrating thing for me when I approach dating, because if there isn't that element where I feel like I need to earn something, then I feel like almost bored. Right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, I don't have to do anything. You just want to like be with me.
Yeah. It's something I cannot understand.
Right. It's so hard to fathom.
It's a really foreign concept for me.
Yeah.
And I've theorized about this of like, if someone were to pursue me and treat me really well, because I have had in the past, I've had someone pursue me and not treat me super well,
Right.
which was manipulative, and there's a lot with that.
Right.
Of like, oh my gosh, you feel this for me, but you're not really showing much of that.
Right.
But the concept of someone pursuing me and loving me well is something where I'm like, I truly do not know how I would receive that.
Yeah.
Which, saying that out loud tells me so much about myself.
Yeah.
In a way of like, oh, I really don't understand I don't understand the fact that my worth is the same no matter what circumstance. I definitely find it to be dependent on others and dependent on just like other things, when it's like one person should not be the sole arbitrator of my worth.
Right.
I think the concept that I am unable to comprehend that someone would want to be around me and love me and not really necessarily get anything from it or have me do anything for it.
Yeah.
Says a lot about the way that I view my worth towards others. And that I just don't believe in it. Which is also a really interesting thing to accept.
Right.
Whenever I think about that, I'm like, oh, that's a really heavy thing.
Yeah.
That I think all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like sobering.
Yeah.
To get that kind of look at yourself.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, wait, this is what I think about myself.
Yeah.
And this is what I think relationships are. And by extension, that's who I think God is.
Right. And
right.
Right. It's this thing of like, what do I think about God if that's what I think about?
Yep.
The equivalent of that relationship on earth.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's intense.
That's some real stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
I don't really like that.
Yeah. Right. Whenever I think about it, I'm like, oh, whoa. I have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
About how God loves me.
Yeah.
And not just how God loves me, but how I actually accept it. Because like the thought of accepting it from a real person that I claim to want is like, whoa, what is that? Like, I don't know how to do that. And then it's like, well, I don't know if I know how to do that with God either all the time.
Yeah. I was reading in a book yesterday. Book's called Bold Love by Dan Allender and somebody else. There was a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was something like, the fact that grace costs nothing is the highest price that you could ask an arrogant person to pay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's me.
Who is that?
That's me. Yeah. Right? The fact that it costs nothing. And if you translate the idea of grace to like the idea of love, right? Because they're very intertwined. It's right? Like, because if I can earn it, then I can control it.
Yep.
Oh, if I can earn it, then I deserve it.
Yep.
If I can work for it, then somehow it makes it feel more legitimately mine that I possess.
Yes. It's about like control and ownership.
Yeah.
It's like, this is mine. It's a formula. I followed it. So it's rightfully mine.
And therefore, this is what you owe me in return.
Right. It's like, I'm owed this. Yes. Yeah. And it's like, if I don't get it, then are you who you say you are? And then it's like, that's not the way that works.
That ain't it.
That ain't it. That ain't it.
Nope.
Yeah.
Can you like maybe talk about one way that has started to transform for you? I mean, maybe it's just at an awareness point currently, and that is like a big first step. But have you had any kind of like moments where you have felt and experienced something else? Like a non-transactional kind of love. Transactional might not be the right word, but
I understand what you're saying. I think that I've really experienced love that is full of grace and mercy from friendships that I've had recently that have taught me a lot just about how little I deserve and how I'm loved anyway.
Right.
And I think that exchange in which I've felt like the last thing that I deserve right now is your forgiveness, but you're telling me that I already have it, has been so transformative in the way that I have viewed my friendships and myself in a way where I think a transformation that I'm still going through right now is kind of like what we were talking about before, is just to really let myself be unfinished and let other people be unfinished. And kind of give people grace.
Yeah.
In a sense where I think my amalgam of the perfect Christian man has also hindered my view of a lot of men.
Of actual Christian men.
Of actual, very real Christian men in a way where I always said, like, not everyone's perfect when you meet them. But the way that I actually kind of synthesized men in front of me is checking off those boxes and really understanding, well, their faith isn't in this place. And I don't know if that will work in the future. I'm someone who thinks 5 years ahead of myself all the time. In a way where, like, it can sometimes hinder.
In a way where you cannot actually be in the present.
Exactly.
Because you're so freaked out about what the decision you're making right now is going to mean for...
Yes.
And for me, it's like who I am as a person in 10 years.
Yes, exactly. I'm the same way. I have huge decision paralysis. I have huge, like, I cannot make this decision now because it might end up in this when I'm 60. And it's like that, which prevents me from really being able to actually live in the present. And it really has been unfair of me to the people that I meet and men that I meet, in the sense where it's like I'm expecting you to take me unfinished and me take you as a consistently growing in the right direction person.
Right.
And that's just not realistic. It's not fair. And I have really just been resting in what does it look like to love a person unfinished in the reality of that.
Yeah.
And not just in the, like, that sounds like the most loving thing we can do. And so, of course, I want to do it. It's like, what does it actually look like for me to love someone in front of me and accept that person and also open myself up to that? Because that's something that's very hard for me to do.
Yeah.
Because dating is hard for me.
Well, Katie, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having
this
me.
Conversation. Before we go, I would love to hear one thing that's hard and one thing that's great.
One thing that's hard right now is I'm feeling a resurgence of some anxieties that kind of come up in the everyday. I had a little bit of an ebb in it for a while where I was feeling very centered and very at peace with all of the things that I couldn't control in my day-to-day life. And kind of in one fell swoop, it just got knocked off of some hinge. And then I was like, I'm suddenly a little bit stressed about things. And lately that's been hard because I feel daunted by the fact that it kind of came up and it's not as simple to kind of quell back down. That's one thing that's hard. And then one thing that's good, I love fall. I love cold weather. And with the presence of fall being very, very heavy in New York right now, it means turtlenecks are back. And I live in a turtleneck. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I am, like, obsessed with turtlenecks. So I'm just happy that I get to wear them and that people don't give me weird looks for wearing them.
Right.
And I just love fall, and I love everything that comes with it. And
It's the best season.
It's the best season.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Like unequivocally.
Yeah. And I'm just, fall makes me happy in all the big and small ways.
Great. Well, Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Huge thanks to Katie for sitting down with me and for being so honest. Thoughts, comments, questions? Follow me on Instagram at maryb.safrit or head over to my website, marybsafrit.com, and drop me a line. Theme music is by Chad Rollinson and sound editing by Andrew Kim. Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit is copyright 2019, Mary B. Safrit LLC, all rights reserved.